we go for launch.
5.
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting. Anything can happen in the next half hour.
4.
My friend, we cannot keep this a secret any longer.
This whole thing is insane.
3.
Quiet, please. I am analyzing.
Where's the kaboom?
2.
There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom.
1.
He was the consummate character actor, a character actor who became a star.
That face was just so magical.
There is not a single movie I've ever done that is not under the shadow that this man casts.
This storm will be magnificent.
He kind of backs into the scene and turns around slowly in the lights, and there's that face. You can't imagine a better entrance.
You can show that image to almost anyone in the world. What's this? Frankenstein.
In The Bride of Frankenstein, they virtually crucify the monster.
I saw my Messiah.
The gods will receive into the underworld the spirit of Ankhsenamun.
He had just an extraordinary career. I mean, everybody raves about him.
People think of him as either British or Russian, but he was actually of Indian descent.
There were various things he didn't want to talk about.
What was he running away from when he left home? What was he frightened of?
He becomes kind of a lovable uncle. He was Uncle Boris.
He was a very, very interesting, complex man.
But he's always an outsider, always feels he doesn't quite belong.
You'll never get rid of me, Toddy.
I think there's an enigma. There's a real mystery at the heart of Boris Karloff, and no one's quite cracked it yet.
Certain actors bring the camera to them, and Karloff had that power.
Greetings, my fellow galactic travelers, and welcome back to Planet 8. This is your mission commander Larry speaking to you from our hidden base. Chief Engineer Bob is here by my side as always in the command center, and circling Planet 8 in our orbital spy satellite is Reconnaissance Officer Karen.
And on this episode of Planet 8, we are blessed to be in the presence of our dear friend Lord Blood-Rah joining us today. Thank you, Lord Blood-Rah.
Always a pleasure to be here on Planet 8. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. And Lord Blood-Rah is joining us today for our Christmas discussion, which is all about Christmas with Karloff, the one and only. Straight away, let's kick it up to the satellite. Karen, why don't you regale us with some information on Boris's Christmas endeavors?
Well, thanks, Larry. So yeah, the idea for this basically came out of thinking about Christmas coming up, some of the things we love about Christmas, and of course there is the beloved How the Grinch Stole Christmas. And I'm talking about the original How the Grinch Stole Christmas, 1966, which featured Boris Karloff as both the narrator and also the voice of the Grinch. And I had the most unfortunate discussion with some younger coworkers a few years ago. Yeah, I can see by your pained expressions, you know where this is going. Yeah, a few years ago, talking at Christmas time and talking about the Grinch. And I said something to the effect of like, oh, I just loved Boris Karloff's voice as the Grinch. And then I had all these blank expressions, these blank faces looking at me. And I'm like, you know, Boris Karloff, the Grinch. And they're like,
Don't you mean Jim Carrey?
They were all, all talking about Jim Carrey. And I was like, I'm like, no, go back and watch the original cartoon. And they're like, there's an original cartoon?
Not one of them knew.
No, nobody knew. It was so, I had to get myself out of there before I either harmed them or myself. So
what's happened to our culture?
Yes, one wonders. But yes, it's such a fantastic cartoon. And both, it combines humor, it's so heartfelt, it's just so kooky and funny. And I think, as a kid, I always knew, I can't even tell you, like, when did I first see like Frankenstein's monster? When did I first see the Universal monsters? I don't know. They were always sort of there. And so I knew that Boris Karloff was the monster, but then like, oh, he's also like somehow doing this voice. So there was always this sort of intrigue about this man who was both the monster, but also this amazing presence who could be like this voice, and then you'd see like his appearances and other things, and he seemed like this very urbane and gentle man. And so it was, I think, initially through seeing The Grinch that, I developed some interest in like, who really was Boris Karloff? And it turned out he was a very interesting gentleman. And so I think that is the genesis of how we decided we wanted to talk about Boris Karloff. And it seemed Christmas is just as fitting a time as any, since his connection with the Grinch, which he won a Grammy for.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes. Sarah Karloff said in an interview that he rarely talked about his work, any of his roles or anything. But he called her out of the blue and said, I've done something that you and the grandchildren might really enjoy. And you should watch this when it comes out. And it was The Grinch, and they just loved it. He was very proud of that. He was very proud of doing that.
Well, and he seemed to enjoy spending time, kind of making kids happy. They talked about in different sources how he enjoyed entertaining kids, and that kids were like naturally drawn to him because he had a little bit of a kind of a mischievous, goofy nature. Which I think is just fascinating because, here's the Karloff, the boogeyman, and yet he likes to play little pranks and do funny things.
Right.
I think it was reading Famous Monsters, maybe Starlog. As a kid, I never put the two together. It was, the Mummy and Frankenstein and, Jekyll and Hyde with Abbott and Costello. That was, my experience with Karloff. And, every year you'd watch, The Grinch and Bob Wilkins. We're so fortunate, those of us in the Bay Area, to have had Bob Wilkins. He interviewed Karloff. And it was only when I read, that, oh, he did this, and this, and I was like, whoa, it is. And something that kind of struck me, it's like, Karloff is known for, all these roles of monsters and macabre, and yet he has the heart of like you're saying, for children, and just, a benevolence and just a sweetheart of a person. Dick Van Dyke every year decorates his home in like a haunted, scary, yet he's, with Mary Poppins singing about a jolly holiday. It's like,
That's right.
Kind of like a similarity with Karloff, but
and Karloff was very gifted doing comedy as well. He was very good. I hosted a movie called The Boogeyman Will Get You with Karloff and Peter Lorre.
Oh,
and it's a madcap kind of. It was made on the strength of Karloff being involved in Arsenic and Old Lace, and when he was on hiatus from that Broadway play, the studio made this film to kind of cash in on that success. And he's hilarious in it. He's this kind of doddering old mad scientist, and Peter Lorre is the sheriff of the town and also a mad scientist. It's a very fun movie. He actually did a lot of comedies. The two that come to mind are The Comedy of Terrors and The Raven with Roger Corman.
That's
and both
right.
of those with Vincent Price and Peter Lorre. He was very funny in both of those.
Yeah, when I used to watch The Grinch as a kid.
Oh, Bob, you scared me. Put the mask back on.
Gotta take that thing off. I gotta talk once in a while. I gotta but I still have Frank on the shirt.
That's cool.
But yeah, no, being a kid growing up watching the Grinch. I mean, the Grinch was what, 67?
I believe so.
I watched it the first time it came on because I was like about 7 years old. But yeah, I mean, I had probably seen Frankenstein, maybe, but he doesn't talk in that. So how would you equate one with the other? I think if there's anywhere I heard his voice prior to the Grinch, it would have been the old Bobby Boris Pickett Monster Mash album, where he basically imitates Karloff throughout all the songs, Or you'd have, was it Frank Gorshin used to go on the variety shows? He'd always do a Boris Karloff, imitation. He always started off with antipasto. You have to be able to say antipasto in order to imitate Boris. But I mean, if you think about the Grinch, I mean, Chuck Jones, made some of the best, of the Bugs Bunny and Roadrunner cartoons and all that. And he was the one who directed the Grinch.
Yeah.
So the animation was great. The characters are great. And then Boris's voice, Boris Karloff's voice. And you hear it when he's acting, but when he's narrating something or he's reading a story or whatever, you really realize how unique his voice was and how clear and all that he could. I mean, people always say, hey, if you could have anyone narrate the story of your life, who would it be? It's like, well, maybe it'd be Boris Karloff.
Yeah. He did a lot of radio in the 40s and 50s. There was a series he did called Are You One of the Frightened? And it was released on record. I'm not entirely sure if it was a radio series or just an album of vignettes, but they were just weird little stories about one of them was about the famous Chinese Siamese twins who somehow one of them died and the other died of a heart attack once they found that the other one was dead, and other just really just kind of strange little snippets of weird facts and things. Very well done, extremely well done. He did a series of episodes of Lights Out that were amazing, obviously playing various characters and things like that. But yeah, that voice is captivating, absolutely captivating. And it's really ironic that the big role that broke him in Hollywood was silent.
Right.
Absolutely silent. And he fought against speaking as the monster in Bride of Frankenstein.
Right.
You think too about the other horror actors, and Bela Lugosi had a accent.
Right.
A lot of times he was saying his roles phonetically. English was definitely a second language to him. Peter Lorre had that just kind of weird, bizarre type voice, and Lon Chaney Jr. He had a deep voice, but the only one I think whose voice could compare to Boris would be Vincent Price.
Yeah. I mean,
good point.
They both really knew how to use the eccentricities of their voices in really
and to see the two of them together in The Raven is and Peter Lorre as well, but
right. And in the
young.
Raven, I'm sorry, what, Bob?
Very young Jack Nicholson.
Extremely young Jack Nicholson. Yeah. Seeing him back then, you wouldn't think, wow, this guy's going to be a great actor someday.
Oh,
that was the I know we did an American International episode, but that was the amazing thing about American International Pictures. It's like they got some of the actors and talent that were kind of towards the ends of their careers, but they also brought in new talent that was at the beginning of their careers and went on to much bigger things, like Roger Corman and Peter Bogdanovich, and just quite a few. Francis Coppola, and of course Jack Nicholson.
Right.
Peter Fonda. So I mean, it was pretty amazing. Michael Landon.
Yeah, most of Hollywood.
Essentially
right.
Of course, at a few American International Pictures later, in the tail end of his career, basically, because he passed away in the late 60s. But
yeah. Well, with the three of those actors doing comedy, Karloff, Laurie, and Vincent Price, they were a really interesting team because Karloff was stage trained. So he was very, know the script inside out, do the script. Peter Lorre was much more, I got an idea of the script, but he would improvise more and kind of play with it. And Vincent Price could do both. He knew the script cold, but he was also playful enough to do it. So he was kind of the moderator between Peter Lorre and Boris Karloff as far as the three of them working together. They must have had a fascinating working relationship.
I agree. I would have loved to have been like one of the production folks, working on there, even if it's a grip, just watching that happen.
Oh yeah.
I was trying to read up on it, and it's like there wasn't a lot on their relationships, but I mean, obviously he and Bella had a good relationship. They're in a lot of movies together, especially in the early years. But it seemed like he was actually a little closer to Peter Lorre as far as friendships go. And
interesting. Okay, well, that's good to know.
That is interesting.
How or why, I don't know, but that's just the kind of the impression I got.
Yeah. Well, Karloff and Lugosi were such different people. Lugosi was much more of a loner. He also he would socialize, but very much in the kind of European Hungarian clique in Hollywood at the time. Whereas Karloff was much more of kind of a family guy, collected stamps, into sports, that kind of thing.
Cricket.
Two very different cricket, very into cricket. Very into cricket. Two very different
I think
very different people.
I think too, Lon Chaney Jr. and Bela Lugosi both got into their addictions later in life. And that may have kind of made him kind of separate himself from them.
Yeah. Whenever Karloff would refer to Bela Lugosi, he would call him poor Bela.
Poor Bela.
He would just say poor Bela. The guy could never catch a break. The addiction he was bankrupt, I want to say 2 or 3 years after he did Dracula. He ended up bankrupt. And also I think that going back to the voice, Bela's voice obviously was very distinctive, but that accent always gave him it typecast him in a sense of being very dark, mysterious, and he wasn't all that flexible with his voice, whereas Karloff was very flexible with his voice and could do a lot more with it. And as Americans, we don't find the British accent as mysterious or alluring as the Hungarian accent, which even in Europe is a very strange accent.
Yeah,
it's a hard accent and an almost impossible accent to get rid of.
And I think it's interesting too with Karloff. He had that lisp, which he never lost, which could have been an impediment, could have been problematic for him. Yet he had such a great tone and great speaking ability that it made up for that. He never had a problem getting any kind of work as far as narration or acting went. And you hear it. I mean, when he's speaking, you hear it, but it's sort of like, who cares? Because the rest is so overwhelmingly good.
The other thing he had going for him in doing my research, he really built relationships with these folks that he would work with. And if a project came up, they'd introduce him and he's like, yeah, sure, let's take a look at it. Let's see what we can come up with. And, he had projects that he died before he could finish. I mean, that he never retired.
Right.
He had work set up to go and then just didn't make it that.
To develop that in the early days, because Carl Laemmle and James Whale and and Boris Karloff. They were all very close.
Right.
And did a lot more projects together other than.
Oh, and Jack Pierce too. I mean, they got along famous. They spent hours in that makeup chair for the monster.
Well, and it's interesting how when you read about Karloff and the makeup, you don't read about him ever complaining about the things he had to go through with the makeup. Whereas if you read about, say, Lon Chaney Jr., it seemed like, oh my God, he was always fighting with Pierce. He was always ticked off about the makeup and everything else. So, it just shows you the different personalities of the men, right? And Karloff, I really wonder, like, one of the things I did not realize before we decided to do this episode, I knew it had taken him a long time to be a successful actor, but I didn't realize that he did things like he did manual labor. I mean, he was, I think, doing like stuff at the railroad, and he was doing trucks and truck driving and all this. I mean, he worked really hard, and he saw a side of life that was, very difficult compared to, I'm going to go on a set and I'm going to act for a while. And, I can't help but think that influenced how he lived his life later on. And like you're saying, he built relationships and he always had projects, because he probably in the back of his head was thinking, hey, I finally got it made, I got to keep this stuff going.
Yeah. I mean, 81 movies before he landed Frankenstein and became an overnight success. 81 movies. And he was, supposedly, the legend goes that James Whale, who directed Frankenstein, would refer to him as that truck driver.
Oh.
And kind of disparaging him for his working class, which is funny because James Whale came from a working class background as well, but was always aspiring to be more. He called Karloff behind his back that truck driver, And and a quick story about James Whale and what finally kind of landed Karloff in a wheelchair. Boris Karloff objected to the scene in the original Frankenstein where he's supposed to throw the girl in the lake. He objected to it. He didn't want to do it. Right. James Whale wanted him to pick the girl up over his head and throw her in. He said, no, can I just pick her up and gently lay her in the water? And they kind of compromised. He picks her up and just tosses her in. But he disagreed with James Whale in front of the cast and crew. So the story goes, to punish him, there's the scene towards the end of the movie where the monster is carrying Dr. Frankenstein up to the windmill. He made him do that shot over and over and over, actually carrying Colin Clive with that makeup on, that suit, those cement stomper, boots, and it messed up his back. It messed up his back. And he was when the movie came out, the studio really didn't know what they had with Boris Karloff's performance, because he was not even invited to the premiere.
That's crazy.
It's crazy, isn't it? They didn't invite him to the premiere. To them, the star was Colin Clive. Right, but everybody, I mean, how can you deny
the movie? Isn't it like the monster and then there's a question mark?
Right, yeah, and his name's not revealed until the final credits. Yeah,
and then I think it's just Karloff, right? It's not.
No, it's Boris Karloff.
Later,
but it became such a huge thing that later Karloff,
the Uncanny.
Like in The Mummy.
Yeah, Karloff the Uncanny. Yeah, and it was never
very few stars then, and even now
go by the
are
one
called
name.
by right. So it was pretty cool.
yeah. In fact, when he did, I believe it was a year later. I don't think it was the same year. I think it was 32. He did The Old Dark House. In the original theatrical version, there's a disclaimer at the beginning that says, yes, the actor playing, the butler. I can't remember the name of his character. If he had a name, it might have just been called the butler. The actor playing the butler is the same Boris Karloff that played the monster in Frankenstein. It's like just to assure people, no, this is the same guy out of, in different makeup, but it's the same actor, So they originally they didn't know what they had. I think that they kind of thought, oh, we can throw anybody under that makeup and they'll just walk around and go. Brr. No, he added.
And they did after.
And he kind of did.
Yeah.
But it's kind of amazing because I did read a little interview with him after he did Son of Frankenstein, and that was the last one he wanted to do.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, well, the costume's hot and the makeup is blah, blah, blah. He just felt that they had done everything they could with the character.
Yeah.
And there really wasn't anywhere else it could go.
Yeah.
In fact, didn't he even object to speaking in Bride of Frankenstein?
Right.
He did. Yeah, he did not want to speak in that.
He thought the power of the creature or the monster in the first movie was the fact that he had to portray everything without speaking, without dialogue.
Right.
So
he did later admit that was a mistake.
Speaking in Bride of Frankenstein,
right?
He thought it was a total mistake.
Right, and he was right in that after Son of Frankenstein, the monster almost became a prop, kind of. It's like he's barely there in House of Frankenstein, House of Dracula, Ghost of Frankenstein. There's a major presence of the monster, but then he turns into Igor at the end of the movie, supposedly.
Right. And then you've got Frankenstein meets the Wolfman, where Bela Lugosi finally got the role that he turned down originally.
Yeah,
had all his dialogue out.
Yeah, they cut his dialogue out. No explanation for why he was doing what he was doing. That he was blind and poor guy.
I will say,
no, he can't be blind, and they just but they still had him in there just.
Right.
And that's the version everybody started doing after that.
Exactly.
But if you think about it, whenever they would do a stereotypical Frankenstein, whether it was in a cartoon or whatever, he's always got his arms out.
Right.
So it's almost like Bela Lugosi's portrayal was actually what stuck.
Yeah, because it was rather, without the dialogue or without the backstory, it was kind of cartoonish. Yeah. And supposedly the producers laughed when they heard Lugosi's voice coming out of the monster. Of course, which I would love to have. Igor's voice. I would love to have heard Igor's voice as the monster, because if they had gone in that direction of the monster is now intelligent and actively evil, not an innocent, it would have been interesting to see where they would have taken the character of the monster.
That would have been interesting. I want to say too, one of the things with the monster speaking in Bride of Frankenstein, if you listen to the Grinch or any of his other roles, it doesn't sound like him to me. I watched the film over again and it didn't sound like friend. It's a great performance. Not to take anything away from Bella. I do like Bella's Igor. I think that is one of the best roles among many that he played. It just
one of the worst or one of the most scariest things. I never think of them like Frankenstein monster as scary, because he was always like, oh, he's like a friend to me when I was a little kid. But in Son of Frankenstein, there is a moment that really is blood curdling to me. And that's when the monster finds Igor's body and he's like touching him and then he lets out this cry, this high pitched, like it seems incongruous coming from this hulking monster, and this high pitched cry, and it's like, whoa. And I just thought that was such an interesting way for Karloff to go. And I don't know if that was his choice or the director's choice or what, but it was a really just kind of terrifying scream.
I have a theory that Igor and the monster were actually in love. I honestly think they were in love.
I'm not going to say you're wrong, because
I really think all the hints, obviously they couldn't express it in the 1940s, but I think that it's all there. The way Lugosi kind of coos to the monster. Come, Fred, this way. You know, that kind of thing. And just the way he's so tender with the monster, and that reaction when Igor dies, his scream, he's lost his only friend, you know.
Yeah. Well, and look, let's be honest, you know, now we look back, but 1940s Hollywood, there were a lot of couples, both straight and homosexual. I'm thinking of what was it, Dracula's Daughter?
Oh yes.
Oh yeah.
You know, I mean, you know, it is what it is, and whether it was accepted then or not, I mean, you know, but it's a very interesting relationship, and the dynamics I think are there.
I'm surprised they didn't kind of bring that to the forefront in like any of the Hammer versions. Yeah,
well, none of the Hammer versions ever. The monsters were byproducts of Dr. Frankenstein, you know.
But I mean, they had a lot of sexuality in those films and things. And
oh yeah,
something where they could have brought it to the forefront, or or any of the modern remakes. I mean, no one really touches on that.
I think the closest we got to that was the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
You're right. Yeah, you're right.
But you know, he just, you know, his role in The Mummy. A lot of people complain they wish they would have seen more of The Mummy. That makeup had what like arsenic, or it was like
most of the back then was toxic.
Yeah, I mean, it was
like asbestos in the bandages or something.
Asbestos, right. That's what it was. Yeah. You know, his take on Ardith Bay too. I mean, I enjoyed that performance as well immensely.
Yeah, and talk about not complaining. He was in head to toe costume, wrapped in that thing, could not go to the bathroom until the end of the day. They shot him walking out of the sarcophagus over to the young guy, him going mad, They shot a couple of versions of it. The version they used, you never see him full body walking. Never see it. He might as well have just been wrapped to the waist down and then his feet.
I mean, there was more time spent in that makeup chair than they got on film.
Right, yeah.
You know, and he probably went to the bathroom in the suit. He probably shouldn't have, but you do what you got to do.
You got to do what you got to do, right? Yeah. But I think that all of that, his gratefulness to the horror roles, to the monster, to Jack Pierce, and just for having a career, again, goes back to struggling for 81 films. You know, before he was able to land this, he was just so grateful to be working and to be well known and to have a career and make a good living.
Well, absolutely. And let's not lose sight, you know, he came over here, I forget what year, you know, worked these jobs, worked in theater. You'd mentioned some radio. He lived here in the Bay Area, and we want to do a shout out to our friend Don Bishop. We had a breakfast or a brunch one time, and he took us up to where Boris was staying out in Vallejo.
Yeah, lived there for a few months when he was in town. Yeah, he, you know, the man put in his dues.
Yeah, the current residents probably had no idea.
What are these four idiots standing up there?
Well, I mean, I don't know how many people actually know the background of that house and actually go there, other than someone like Don. But,
I know.
True.
When we went and saw the Michael Myers house down in LA,
I remember that.
Myers was with us, and they had a sign, you know, please do not stand on the porch to take pictures, or you know. So obviously, a lot of people go there to check that out, but I don't think it's the Boris house is as much of an attraction as the Michael Myers house. But
if I stayed there, I would have a sign, friend, good. Get off the lawn.
I was thinking though about Lord Blood-Rah, what you said about how James Whale sort of, I don't know, tried to humiliate him by saying, oh, he's the truck driver or whatever. But his family Karloff's family actually, and I was surprised to read, they were all expected, like all his brothers went off and served in, I think, like a diplomatic
corps.
Yeah,
in India.
Right. And he actually was part Indian, I think on his mother's side, which is interesting because now when I look at him, I can kind of see like, oh yeah. And I guess he always told people, well, you know, I have a tan from being in the California sun. You know, things were different back then.
Beautiful olive skin. Yeah. It's great.
And so, yeah, just the things people used to do. But
right.
Yeah, he bucked that whole thing. You know, he could have gone and done that and probably lived sort of a very genteel life, but that's not what he wanted to do. He wanted to be an actor. And like you said, he really suffered for it. He spent all those years and then he had the success, but that kind of really irritates me that Whale would be like, oh, the truck driver. It's like,
yeah.
Well, he even would tell a story that he and his wife of the time, Dot, would basically between films, they'd do gardening. They plant vegetables and they had a little farm. And his whole idea was, if I don't get another part, we need to be self-serving and be able to live off the land. And, you know, because I mean, when he started and he was doing acting, he was making like $5 a day on a lot of these roles. I'm sure he didn't get much more for Frankenstein because, again, he was, even though he had done like 81 films, he was still a relative unknown. And, you know, he's under all this makeup. It's like, okay, he's kind of a secondary actor.
Right.
So yeah, even though he was a professional actor, he wasn't really making a living on it until later on.
And like, not only probably was he not paid very much for Frankenstein, he spent hours with Jack Pierce experimenting on him with the makeup with no pay. With no pay. It's mind-boggling now to think about.
And I think that and some of his other experiences pushed him into being one of the founding members of the Screen Actors Guild.
Oh, yeah.
Good point.
Which was a very interesting thing to discover, that he was one of those people who founded it in 1933, which was just, a couple years after he, reached fame with Frankenstein, which was pretty ballsy because it wasn't like he was super established and didn't have anything to lose. He still had something to lose, but he was on the board of the guild, I guess, for over 20 years. And so, looking out for his fellow actors,
Well, he was in the trenches. I mean, some of the films that he did prior to Frankenstein, and then I won't say the ordeal of the makeup, but the makeup, it was tough and not as bad as The Mummy, and like I said earlier, he never complained. But I'm sure he kept that in his mind. I mean, without supportive unions here. Without a union, you're working how many hours? You're getting little or no pay. There, you get fired like on the spot. There's no protections, and so God bless him for doing that. I mean, he accomplished a lot, but that's a major accomplishment to be proud of.
He had some smarts about him. I mean, when he came over to Canada from England, and he was doing stage acting in Canada. And he basically, when he went for his first role, he made up this whole story about this big acting career he had in England. I mean, you don't have the internet back then, as you can't really check up on him, right? So he could say anything. So yeah, he had this huge career and he was this big actor in England and he wanted to come over and make his way towards Hollywood. And, when they basically hired him based on that, to do plays and things in Canada. But
well, hey, that's how I got this gig on Planet 8. So, nobody questioned it.
That's kind of interesting how Karloff's experience is kind of a mirror image of Lugosi's, because Karloff had no acting career at all in his home country, came over to Canada and then later the United States and built a huge career. Lugosi's career was bigger in Hungary. He was a huge stage actor in Hungary and very well known and respected. came to America, worked, got Dracula, became big. According to all the stories, blew his money and was rather difficult to work with, and had a more kind of tragic end than Karloff did.
Well, Lugosi, he was doing Dracula on stage, like,
oh yeah,
before he got the film role.
Oh yeah, and had to lobby hard to get the film role. They didn't want him. They had to remind Universal that Bela Lugosi was still alive for him to get into Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and from what I recently heard, an agent, Bela Lugosi's agent, had to take like the receipts and statistics of how much money Dracula made for Universal, and go into the producers and dump it on their desk and show them, this man saved this studio. This film saved this studio. You've got to put him in this film because this is the role that made him. And that's what finally made them do it.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very, it's just surprising that he didn't play it in any other film.
Yeah.
Yeah. 2 films.
Where it's like, Karloff got the monster in 3 films. And,
yeah.
Of course, Lon Chaney Jr. played the werewolf throughout, or the Wolfman throughout.
Yeah.
But it was like Bela had to wait for Abbott and Costello to bring him back as And the thing that amazes me, and I think we talked about this in our vampire episode, is the fact that in all his scenes as Dracula, he never has fangs.
No.
He never wears fangs.
No. Yeah.
He goes to bite, on the neck and things, but you don't see the fangs as he's going in.
Yeah, no, right. He played, the film Return of the Vampire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Was originally going to be a sequel to Dracula. Universal sued. Because it was made, I think, by MGM, I think. I might have that wrong, but it was made by another studio. It wasn't made by Universal. And Universal sued, said, no, you cannot have Dracula and you cannot have him playing Dracula. So they changed the story a bit. But if you look at that film, it's more or less a sequel. It's a sequel to Dracula. Yeah, it works very well.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good film too.
It's a very good film.
Well, speaking of films, let me ask you guys, each of you, we'll start with Lord Blood-Rah. What's a favorite performance, be it film or television, that Boris Karloff was in? One of your personal favorites.
Other than the monster, of course.
Other than Frankenstein.
Yeah, let's take Frankenstein out of it.
Yeah. The monster's a gift. Yeah, right. One of the more unique and fascinating ones I found is a little known film called West of Shanghai. And even as I'm saying that, I'm not sure that's the title. I believe, West of Shanghai. Yeah, West of Shanghai. And Karloff plays a Chinese gangster. He's called General something, General Chin, I think it is. I'm not quite sure, but he's like a warlord in this area. It's set in the 1930s, and he's a criminal. He's pseudo military, a complete villain, but he plays him with this incredible charm, this great kind of, he's doing a Chinese accent, and he's obviously in Chinese makeup, but he plays him with just this kind of roguish humanity, this kind of fun, this fun character, this fun quote unquote villain. And I thought that performance is great. And if you compare and contrast that to him playing Fu Manchu in The Mask of Fu Manchu, which is one of the most racist movies ever made.
Oh.
But he plays Fu Manchu obviously as a more arch villain, but he never falls back on the racial stereotype. He plays him as a Chinese man, but he is a very well-educated, erudite Chinese man. He's never playing that for his Asianness as part of his villainy. He is just a villain a highly educated villain that happens to be Asian. So his performances in those two films is really interesting. I mean, obviously never get away with it today. Obviously never get away with it today. But he walks such a fine line in both of those performances. I just found it fascinating.
Well, he also went on to do a series of the Charlie Chan movies too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I don't believe I've ever seen any of his Charlie Chan movies. I don't think I've ever seen it.
I don't know how many movies he made. I think it was over like a 10-year period or something that he made.
He did a series of them. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. Karen.
This is tough. I don't know if we rule out the monsters, I guess of his horror films, I would say, then I would probably next go to the Black Cat. He's just like, and that role is just so like irredeemably evil.
Right.
And then you have the great pair up of Karloff and Lugosi. So that one is great. But then rewatching some stuff or watching some stuff for this, I saw Targets again. And that's just such a great, and it's more topical than ever. That film is just so just such a gut punch. And I feel like we're getting to see more of probably what Karloff was really like in that too.
Oh yeah.
You know. Yeah. So it's enjoyable to kind of see sort of like what he was like later in life, and yeah, and just that ending where he just sort of, well, I mean, it's an old film, so spoiler, but where he just confronts the killer and just kind of smacks him around, you know, like it's, yeah, there's just something about that's I don't know. It shouldn't be gratifying, but it sort of is, but it's still very, very kind of depressing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's Karloff really playing himself. That's the most autobiographical performance he's ever given, and he's so good at it.
Yeah, I tried to see if I could find any comments from him on that film, but my brief Googling turned up nothing really. So
well, that had to be like his last film or close to it, right?
Very close.
Yeah,
very close. Yeah, unfortunately, not for the fact that he died, but unfortunately it wasn't. That's not the performance he went out on. Yeah. He did a series of 3 films in Mexico. I don't want let's see, the Crimson Altar, I believe, is one of them. Island of the Snake People, which I've hosted, and another one that I can't remember.
Yeah, some cheapies.
Not winners. Yeah, not winners.
How about you, Bob?
Well, I mean, there were a couple films that I kind of rewatched leading into this. Take the older one first was The Body Snatcher, where he, in Frankenstein, Dr. Frankenstein and Igor are Fritz in the first one.
Right, Fritz, that's right.
Digging up the graves. But in Body Snatcher, Boris gets to take that role. And he's basically a grave robber. And he's getting bodies for a scientist that's doing experiments. And he ends up, and Bela Lugosi's in this one too, in a fairly small role. But he ends up killing Bella, and that's kind of sends him over the edge at the end, towards the end of the film. But his performance is really good because he's like this, I don't know, you would say like a lighthearted psycho.
Yeah.
Because he's really, he's right on the verge of evil, but he's got this sense of humor. And when he's talking to people and things, he's like joking around and kidding with them, and but I thought it was just a really good performance.
Completely forgot about that movie. Yeah.
And then the other one would be Die Monster Die, because I'm a big fan of Nick Adams, of course, from Monster Zero and all the world. And Yeah, he's in this movie with Boris Karloff, and it's just they play it pretty straight, but it's kind of a wild and wacky idea because it's like this meteor crashes, and Boris thinks it was sent from God.
Oh, yeah.
Where it landed, plants started growing and things. Oh, it's a miracle.
Right.
So he's taking all these little radioactive chunks of meteor and sticking them in pots with plants, and the plants are growing. And, of course, everyone around those plants are all getting sick and, radiation poisoning.
Right.
So,
and then that monster in the greenhouse.
Yeah. It's an American international film. It's a lot, it's a lot of fun.
Based on H.P. Lovecraft's Color from Outer Space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool.
So yeah, I definitely enjoyed both of those.
Nice. Well, like Karen, I enjoyed Targets, and one of my favorite performances of Boris Karloff. And like it said, unfortunately, that's not the one he went out on, but in my mind and heart, it is. This was done back in the late 60s, Peter Bogdanovich. First, I'm not going to name names because I don't think that people who perpetuate these types of crimes deserve any recognition whatsoever. Should you choose to Google, that's fine. But there was a shooting in 1966. Was it the Texas?
Yes.
Where's
Bell
my
Tower?
University of Texas Tower shooting. Yeah. And there's actually a scene in Targets that it's not, scene by scene based on that person, what they did, but it was the start of an idea that Peter had for this film. And what I thought was interesting is Bogdanovich got to make Targets because Boris Karloff owed studio head Roger Corman 2 days of work. And look, Karloff being the deal maker, and my word is my name, and
right.
So another thing that was interesting about Targets is a very young Jack Nicholson, perhaps his first starring role, I'm not sure, but it was a film called The Terror.
The Terror.
And so they used pieces of that film in Targets to show that what was the guy he played, Orlock? Byron Orlock was
okay. So in the
Karloff's,
Targets, he played Byron Orlock.
In Targets, and he was this famous horror star from way back when, and because of the climate, the shootings that were going on and the types of crimes, he no longer felt that he was scary as an actor playing these roles. And so he's the height of his success in the movie is this Orlock character, and he's like, I'm out, not going to do this anymore. And they talk him into doing one more live, not a signing, but they're going to take him to a drive-in movie. Yes, show his film. And like you said, Karen, that the ending to me, it was kind of like, I don't know if the guy was on acid or what, but he's like looking at the movie screen, looking at Boris Karloff, looking at the movie screen of Boris Karloff.
I think he was so deranged he couldn't tell what was real and what. Yeah, he just couldn't tell reality from fantasy anymore. And
he was looking back, and he shot Boris's assistant or his friend, the girl.
Yes.
I can't remember her name, but he was
Jenny.
Jenny.
Ah,
thank you.
Yeah. Well, I just saw it.
He was so upset. And I remember as a kid, my grandfather wouldn't hit me with the belt, but he'd come up and give me a real good slap in the face. And that's what Boris does. He goes up to the shooter, just smack, smack, hits him with the cane. The cops come and arrest him. And he makes a comment, something like, "This is what I was afraid of."
Right. Is that what I was afraid of?
Is that what I was afraid of? And then, that was it. But if you haven't seen any of these movies, I'm going to check out some of the ones that Lord Blood-Rah mentioned and Bob. But Targets is really, really good film. Peter Bogdanovich actually has a role in this film as well. So
Well, he produced it. He directed it. He wrote it. He stars in it.
Hey,
He
you
does.
know,
Well, I think one thing, in referring to these movies, there's a quote by Boris Karloff that he didn't like calling any of these horror movies because he said a lot of those, they do appeal to children. They're entertaining whole families. He wished that they didn't call them horror movies. Maybe they would call them like terror movies instead of horror. But yeah, he didn't really like being associated with horror films. He felt terror or mystery or what have you. But
Well, that's interesting because one of the things we haven't talked about is his delving into television. And he did a show called Thriller, right? And Thriller had 2 seasons. It was on from 1960 to 1962. And when it started, it was much more about mystery and suspense. And as I understand it, it started slowly moving much more into like Gothic horror. So I don't know how much of that was just maybe in the beginning, maybe him wanting to do more of a mystery show or how it was pitched to him or whatever, but I didn't get to see it. They didn't show it when I was a kid. It wasn't repeated. Like Twilight Zone was on all the time, so we saw that. I saw Hitchcock later in, I think, the 80s. Somebody started showing it, but I never did see Thriller. So I had watched a few episodes on like YouTube for this. And it's like the standard thing where they would start to show a sequence of a story, then Karloff comes on and kind of talks a little bit about what's going to happen. I thought it was interesting. He would introduce the actors. The actors would come and he would say, these are the players, and then they would do the show. So yeah, it looks like an interesting show, but I wonder if he originally wanted to be more like a mystery show and then they decided to go a little bit more into the horror angle.
well, I saw that he even appeared in one of the episodes.
Yeah, he was in 5 episodes.
Right. Yeah. And that was actually the second TV series that he had. The first was called The Veil. That never aired. They shot a number of episodes. It's available now on DVD and Blu-ray and probably all over YouTube. But there were a number of episodes that they shot, had I believe an entire season in the can, and the distribution company fell apart and it just never worked. So it was never aired.
Wow.
But yeah, I highly recommend getting the DVD collection, or I'm sure they're on YouTube. Few of those were very, very good.
And the name of the series again was
The Veil.
Veil.
The Veil. Yeah. Yeah, I posted a couple of those episodes on my Cathode Zone on my YouTube channel.
I'll have to take a look out for that.
Yeah.
Well, and they took those Thriller episodes and used those to launch a Gold Key comic book, which only the first 2 issues were Boris Karloff's Thriller, and then with Thriller getting canceled, then they started calling it Boris Karloff's Tales of Mystery.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
My uncle had a few of those issues, and at one time I had them because I got his books, but I went and looked in the collection to see if I could bring them out and show them, but I guess I sold them already. So
I think I've got 1 or 2 floating around in my closet, probably. Yeah.
Will Varro had given me a set of DVDs. He upgraded to Blu-ray, I guess, and it was the old series Route 66. 2 guys driving around in a convertible Corvette and in and out of crimes and mysteries and stuff. But in the 3rd season, the 6th episode called Lizard's Leg and Owlet's Wing, Peter Lorre, Lon Chaney Jr., and Boris Karloff star in that episode. And Boris actually puts the Frankenstein makeup on in that episode. And I think it's the last time he ever wore the makeup.
And they're playing themselves.
and they're playing themselves. Yeah, I think they're going to a convention or something, right?
Well, Peter Lorre contacts Lugosi and Cheney to meet him at this hotel because he wants to do a new horror project. And Karloff is against it. Almost kind of a flashback to Targus. He says, "Look, we're old hat. We can't do it anymore." And Cheney's game is really interesting because they're all supposed to play themselves. And Boris Karloff is Boris Karloff, and Peter Lorre is Peter Lorre, and Lon Chaney is just a big kid that just, hey guys, I'm ready to do this. In fact, there's a scene where, to prove that the monsters are still scary, Chaney puts on the werewolf makeup, Wolfman makeup, and it's at the same hotel as back then they were called secretaries, a secretary convention.
Okay.
And he goes into the ballroom and scares everybody, and then he meets this one woman that he can't scare, and he starts crying. It's like,
that was the drugs kicking in.
That was the drinking. That was the drinking kicking in. Yeah.
Peter's like, Karloff, why is he crying? He's been on the sauce, old boy. But yeah, that was cool. If you guys, I'm sure it's, like I said, YouTube or something that's out there. It's something worth watching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, he did a lot of TV shows. I was looking through YouTube and checking different things out, and he did a This Is Your Life. They pulled him up to do it. This Is Your Life, and that was a pretty interesting episode to see some of his friends. He had like what would be, I guess, a equivalent to like a high school friend show up, and boy, I think he just wanted to keep talking to that guy and not do the rest of the episode. That was interesting.
And he's genuinely excited to see Jack Pierce.
Yes.
Oh,
you
yeah.
could feel he was so excited to see him again.
Right. And then they brought out some well-known cricket player who had gotten an autographed ball for him. And he lit up. Talk about a little kid. He looked really excited when he came out.
Well, and then there was the manager of a cricket team. This is the only time I think I ever got a glimpse of Boris Karloff angry. Is this guy was talking about how Boris had supported the team, and he said, in fact, and Boris said, no. And he said, no, Boris, I'm going to tell it.
Oh.
And apparently, like, he funded an entire season for the team or did something major for the team financially.
Right.
And he was like, well, thank you. But he did not want, he didn't want to blow his own horn, is what it was. And that, so he's obviously a humble guy, but he was like, no. Yeah, again, YouTube, look for the Boris Karloff You Bet Your Life, because he was so angry when he realized it. And he's so shocked because the setup, if you've ever seen not You Bet Your Life, but This Is Your Life, the setup is the person who's going to be the subject of the show doesn't know. They're somewhere doing something else at another show, and then the host comes in and says, that this is your life, and they're shocked.
And I saw an interview with his wife, his sixth wife.
Yes.
We didn't talk about that, but she said, oh, he was so mad at me for setting up This Is Your Life. And when he went up to, get on the stage, he gave me the most withering look. She says, but I think he was okay later about it. Oh. But he did not want to do the show.
Well, it's pretty scary because it's like, if somebody came to you and said, Karen Walker, this is your life.
Right.
It's like, who? Oh, no, who are they going to bring
back
out?
And look for people from your past. It's like, people you really want to see, or is it like
they find out about the bodies?
Where'd you dig
Quick
that
side note, they brought that show back like in the 70s, and they did Angie Dickinson, and the host, she's at some show, whatever, and host comes up to her and says, Angie Dickinson, this is your life. And she says, no, it isn't. And she walked out. They couldn't, it was hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. So if I remember right, they did the episode without her.
Oh my gosh.
She would not take part in it.
She must have really thought she had some dark secrets.
Right?
funny.
I know. Yeah. Who did she anger in
How's
her
that
past?
coming out?
They had an episode with Laurel and Hardy. It's a great show, and you know, when it originally aired, if I remember correctly, they, not that they're at the end of their career, but they built a career, and so you know, to go back to their high school teacher or you know their neighbor who mowed the lawn and stuff
Right.
like that, it was
Right.
cool to watch.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I want to go back and watch the Boris Karloff one just to see him and Jack Pierce again.
It is cool.
Some genuine affection there.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, a friend of ours, Streffen Taylor, did a Jack Pierce documentary.
That is great. Yes.
Yeah, it is a really good documentary.
Haven't seen it, you can go to novemberfire.com and purchase it there. And it's just, you know, there's not a lot of like actual film footage of Pierce that was available. So a lot of it is stills and pictures, and the way he uses the camera movement on the stills, you almost think that, you know, that everything's moving and, you know, that some of it's film, but very good documentary. You'll learn a lot if you're interested in the Universal Monsters makeup, Jack specific, and
absolutely a lot of good information.
That's not part of my censor suite, by the way.
Speaking of which, any last minute stories or comments on Mr. Boris Karloff before we switch over to the censor sweeps? All right.
I just think, you know, whether he wants to be or not, he's basically the face of horror.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the guy.
Yeah.
So,
Well, for oldsters like us.
well, I mean, you know, Dracula was first, but I think, you know, Frankenstein really launched the horror genre. And, you know, I don't think it would have been even remotely as popular if it wasn't for Boris Karloff and his book.
Yeah, he was prolific and versatile. You know, he did so many different types of projects, worked with so many different people.
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing guy.
And never phoned it in. Always gave 100%, even when he could barely walk and barely breathe. Still gave it 100%.
He was still.
Oh, yeah, Die Monster Die. He plays the entire movie in his wheelchair.
Absolutely. Well, this was a wonderful Christmas with Boris Karloff.
Thanks, Boris.
Christmas with Karloff. Yes, we raise a glass and cheers to
Merry
you.
Christmas, Mr. Karloff.
Cheers to all of you as well
Yes.
for being here on the podcast. For all of you listening, tell you what, let's go ahead and jump into our censor sweep. Lord Blood-Rah, you being the guest. What do you got going on that we can share with our listeners either now or things coming up? We're coming into the Christmas season, or next year, 2024 is upon us. Take it away.
Well, being the end of the year, I'm making plans for appearances and live shows for next year. But as always, you can check out my TV series, Lord Blood-Rah's Nerve-Wracking Theater, on the Nostalgia Network. And that's Saturday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific, and again at 2 a.m. Eastern, 11 p.m. Pacific. And you can get the Nostalgia Network on Roku, Sling Free TV, BTS Local, a whole bunch of platforms. If you go to watchnost.com, you can find where to watch it. There's also my podcast talking about Boris Karloff and his radio work. You can check out my podcast, Lord Blood-Rah's Nerve-Wracking Auditorium, where I host classic old radio, horror, and science fiction. You can get that on Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever podcasts are available. And also on YouTube. On YouTube, I also put a new episode of Lord Blood-Rah's Nerve-Wracking Theater up every Friday. You can check that out. My third show, Captain Paxar's Star Cadet Hour, you can find that on YouTube as well. All of the YouTube things, you can go to YouTube, look for Lord Blood-Rah all of those shows will come up. It's on hiatus now for the holidays, but you can catch Captain Paxar's Star Cadet Hour, new episodes starting January 6th. And on that show, it's all classic episodes of 1950s children's science fiction shows, like Flash Gordon, Captain Zero, Commando Cody, Sky Marshal of the Universe, Rocky Jones, all of those things. And they switch out those episodes per episode of Paxar. So you can find all that on YouTube. Anything else, go to lordbloodrah.com to find out what I'm doing and where I'll be.
Yeah,
Thank you for the
I
opportunity.
got a request, man. You got to show Rocket Robin Hood.
I looked for Rocket Robin Hood. Unfortunately, it's not public domain.
Really?
I thought, sure, after all these years, it'd be, some, I believe those are made in Canada. So a Canadian company still holds the rights to that. That was always one of my favorites when I was a kid, was Rocket Robin Hood. I wanted to do that, and I looked into like all the Herculoids and those things, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's all Hanna-Barbera, I'm sure.
That's all Hanna-Barbera. You can't touch those. Yeah.
Well, I mentioned Rocket Robin Hood to people, and they're like, huh?
Oh, Rocket Robin Hood. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
I have some great news for you, Lord Blood-Rah. Mickey Mouse will be in public domain next year.
It's like the original black and white design of him or something, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Like Winnie the Pooh and some other stuff.
Don't underestimate the Disney lawyers.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
I'll redo it somehow.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's cool. Chief, what you got going on?
Yes, sir. Well, I'm hoping to have a big announcement really soon, but we're still in the process of negotiating.
So, here I thought someone was pregnant. I'm like, oh, wait a minute now.
Am I showing? No, it's we got big plans for 2024, and pretty much everyone here knows. Lord Blood-Rah knows very well because he was in our last meeting that we had over the weekend about it. But yeah, it'll be big. But in the meantime, I got some trinkets. Leading up to this episode, I was reading out of this book. And that's Karloff, the Man, the Monster, the Movies. And this is so old. In fact, some of the pages are almost falling out of it. But this was back
like all of us.
Scholastic book. You were in school and they'd pass out the little, paper basically that had, you could check off what books you wanted to buy. And I'd always go right to the film and TV section and look for whatever monster books they had. And this was one of them. Got that there. And then for some reason I paid my my Best Buy bill and I overpaid it. So I had a credit. So I was over at Best Buy today. And what am I going to get? And I found they have 4K steel books of season 1 and 2 of The Mandalorian.
Oh,
they're like $49.95 or what each, but I thought, yeah, I'll get that. Basically free with an overpayment.
Holy heck.
Nice.
And then lastly, this just came out, so I haven't had a chance to read it. I don't know if it's good or if it sucks or whatever, but I did get it. It's the official novel of the series by Pat Cadigan of Ultraman.
Oh,
Ultraman novel based on the original series. So how bad could it be? But I tend to be overly critical about things I love. So we'll see. Maybe I'll give a book report in a later episode after I get around to reading it.
Yeah, it's not a rousing promotion.
It was better than the last dinosaur book that I had.
Yeah. Every time I laugh, a couple of pages drop out like Lord Blood-Rah. That was so funny. Walker, what do you got for us, bud?
So did I share, I think I shared with Bob and Larry the saga of me getting my mini stereo before Thanksgiving. So Amazon basically screwed me, as they usually do. I really wanted to get this little mini stereo, like what they call a shelf unit with like little speakers and a CD player. I still have hundreds of CDs because I believe in the power of physical media. And so I ordered this thing. I thought, oh, this is great. I'll get this right before Thanksgiving. I got 4 days off. Start listening to all of my CDs, and it has, you can hook up your Bluetooth so you can play your phone and other stuff. And so it's like, it's not going to arrive Wednesday night. It's going to arrive Thursday morning. I'm like, that's still okay. That's still okay. I'll live with that. And then Thursday morning, it's like, well, now it looks like it's going to be Friday. I was like, Jesus. And then it was like, maybe it's going to be Monday. So they just, through the whole weekend, this kept happening. It finally arrived like Sunday. I know. So
they usually throw in a undetermined date or something in there.
Oh yeah, I would have totally just lost my mind. But
more pages fall out. Right.
It's a very nice little Philips unit with the speakers. It has really good sound. And so, I've been listening to stuff, but what I got myself were these little goodies right here.
Those were my very first Beatle albums back in the early 70s.
Well, Bob, these the Beatles, what are affectionately known as the Red and Blue albums, these were the very first rock albums of any kind that I had. And I can't remember if they were Christmas gifts or birthday gifts to me. And so that holds a little bit of a special place in my heart. But they remastered these. They added some more songs to these. So now they've brought in some. They kept all the songs that they had before, but they added more songs to them. So now they've got certain songs I really like "Tomorrow Never Knows" off of Revolver, and especially with the Red album. Because a lot of the early songs were on really limiting 4-track recording. What they've been able to do with all this fancy pants machine learning and stuff, they've been able to separate, a lot of times it'd be like, okay, we're going to put piano, a vocal, and drums on this track, and everything was a little bit muddy. They've been able to go out and separate all of those things out. It sounds a lot sharper now. So it's really interesting. I imagine we have some crossover with listeners who are interested in music, maybe the Beatles, whatever. I would say it's well worth it to go out, even if you're like, I've got all those on another disc or 3 albums, or, we replicate so many things because we're triple dipping and whatever. But these are really worth it. I think especially the Red one sounds really good. The Blue one, I think they were starting to do 8 tracks and recording and stuff, so it may not sound as different, but the Red one really sounds fantastic.
One thing I'll say about the Beatles too is if you don't have the mono Beatles set, that's the one to get.
Because, a lot of the stuff was specifically recorded with the mono.
Well, everything was recorded mono back then.
Right.
Because was listening to music on their AM radio in their car with one speaker, right? So that was the big emphasis. And when the Beatles would record the songs, they'd all be there and they'd be intimately involved in the mixing of the mono tracks. And then they'd leave and we're done. And then George Martin and what's the guy's name? Emmerich. Anyway, the engineer, they would sit there and do the stereo tracks, but they wouldn't really pay a lot of attention to the stereo tracks. So a lot of times it'd be all the vocals are on the right channel and all the instruments are on the left channel. And you can just sit there and turn it, just turn up the right channel and just hear them sing, or turn up the left channel and hear it like instrumentals. But the mono recordings though are these are the way they're supposed to be.
How God and the Beatles intended it.
Right. Can I add one more thing? Talking about pages falling out, this one fell in. I recently saw an incredible documentary called A Disturbance in the Force, How the Star Wars Holiday Special Happened. And I love that. Not how it was made,
You
how
glutton
it
for punishment.
happened, how this weird freak of nature occurred. And it's a great documentary. It's on Apple TV. Highly recommend it. It's also available on Blu-ray and DVD as well. But I don't know what the website is. But if you look up a Disturbance in the Force Star Wars Holiday Special, is bound to come up, and it's so fun and such a slice of that time period of when that thing was allowed to be done.
And yet you still cannot get an actual official version of the holiday special.
You get almost all of it in the documentary, I'll tell you, at least the highlights. That documentary happens to be in the mobile command.
There you go. I should have known.
So, Lord Blood-Rah, I agree, because everybody asks, why did George Lucas? Because it wasn't just George.
No.
It was the lead actors. It was and it's hard to describe. First of all, if you've never seen the Star Wars Holiday Special, find it. It's out there on YouTube or the Google or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Best watched on the heaviest drugs you can get your hands on.
Let me.
NyQuil.
And I'll tell you what I loved about this is that they says, well, look, and everybody says this, even Schwarzenegger in his documentaries, did you smoke weed? It was the 70s. Okay, so it was the 70s. And how did they promote things in the 70s? Variety shows were very big in the 70s.
People don't understand that we watched Sonny and Cher and Tony Orlando and Dawn. That was what was on.
Shields and Yarnell actually got a variety. They're ventriloquists, or not ventriloquists, but mimes. So they're showing Donnie and Marie had an episode where they had Darth Vader. They had the dancing stormtroopers. Spoiler alert, were the Osmond brothers.
Right.
With
Bob Hope? Bob Hope special?
Dean Martin. They had all these variety. But yeah, Skywalker, Mark Hamill was singing and dancing with Bob Hope, and they show footage of this.
Bob Hope is Darth Vader.
Basically, it is such an interesting and well-made documentary. They tried to, who was it, Lord Blood-Rah, the director, I think? They tried to interview him, and he refused to be interviewed, even after all these years.
Hombre?
Yeah.
Hombre, something like that. Yeah, he just didn't want to talk about it anymore.
Oh, just
done with it. Yeah.
And, I won't take the steam out of it. If you get a chance to watch it, it's a hell of a lot more interesting than the Star Wars special itself, I'll tell you that much.
Oh, it is.
And Disney being what Disney is, they actually had some Life Day merchandise in the park this year. So
anything to make money.
Go figure.
I mean, that was the first place you could see Boba Fett, right?
That was the first time, and
Disney
they
Plus, I think,
explained
even has that little Boba Fett cartoon from the holiday special.
I think that's why they can't disown it entirely.
Yeah.
Because Boba Fett is significant, right?
Yeah. And like I said, it's interesting. They don't put the blame on anyone, but they just kind of explain how it came into being.
I guess they don't interview George Lucas, do they?
It's old interviews, nothing new.
Yeah.
But even with his interviews, it's like, oh, okay. Look, bottom line, they were afraid that people were going to forget about Star Wars between Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
As ridiculous as that sounds. And one of the guys was saying, this was this period of time where Star Wars was it. There was no Empire. There was no Return of the Jedi. There were no Ewoks.
Right.
There were no bounty hunters. It was just Star Wars.
Right. That was the only glimpse of that universe we had. We didn't have all the lore we have now.
Right. There was no lore. And it's a fascinating thing to watch.
It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you brought that up.
I'm going to have to get Apple TV. Do you guys all have Apple TV?
I don't, and hence the physical media.
Okay.
It may be streaming on Google or Amazon, Walker. I'm not sure.
I don't know.
I wanted to have a copy of this so that I could take it to people's houses.
I had to get Apple TV Plus for Marvel Legacy of Monsters, even though I got press access to the entire series like before it came out. But
well, I was thinking between that and then I hear a lot of good stuff about For All Mankind. It's supposed to be a really good series.
plus, J.J. Abrams is working on Speed Racer.
The series.
The Speed Racer series on Apple TV Plus.
I just read something before we came on air, where we came to record. Kugler's working on the X-Files.
I read that a while back.
News to me. So I'm like, okay, they're gonna start casting.
Oh, so a reboot.
A reboot, yeah. No Jillian, no Duchovny. And how's that gonna work?
I don't know about that.
I don't know. It didn't work so well when Duchovny left.
I mean, think about that new Kolchak the Night Stalker.
Oh, that was a travesty.
Well, let's not.
Now, that being said, Battlestar Galactica, Ron Moore, fantastic.
Lost in Space, the new Lost in Space was actually good.
Very good.
I think that's the thing. You have to take something like Battlestar Galactica, you take something that was kind of just okay and not great, and then rework
it. Wasn't great.
Just don't listen to this part, Bob.
There's a group of fans who think, there were death threats because Starbuck became a female.
Oh, yeah.
And people were just pissed. And sorry, but Katie Sackhoff did a better job than Dirk Benedict ever did, in my humble opinion.
To each their own, and
yeah. So
yeah,
we'll see. Some people like Batman versus Superman, some people not so much. I got it in.
Sometimes you feel like a nut, sometimes you don't.
How did we transition from always mentioning Popeye to always mentioning Batman versus Superman?
I don't know. It's magic.
It's magic.
Hey, for those of you that listened to our last podcast about the MCU, news today, Marvel drops actor Jonathan Majors after the assault verdict.
Yeah.
So we speculated, we thought, we thunk, where are they going to go? Lord Blood-Rah, since you weren't part of that discussion, do you have any thoughts? Who would the new Thanos of the MCU be if you had an ability to play with that IP?
They can go a lot of different ways with this whole multiverse thing, like with Loki. You had a female Loki, totally different person.
Yes.
You had an alligator Loki, totally different person. You could have a totally different Kang.
Yep.
You could have a Kang so psychotic he wipes out all the other Kangs.
Yep.
And you've got, this new guy is Kang.
Although it was interesting, I heard that it was in Jonathan Portman's contract that no other actor could play Kang.
Majors?
Ooh. Jonathan Majors.
I'm sorry.
But the contract is null and void now, right? Because of the conviction here.
I mean, who knows?
Yeah, but with the multiverse, how that affects contracts, who knows? Disney lawyers, man. Disney lawyers.
Well, yeah, we'll see. But I thought that as well. If they can have an alligator Loki,
right,
they can have anything, Kang show up.
But now the rumor I had heard was, even before this verdict, is that they were going to gear up towards Doctor Doom being the next big bad, because they want to introduce the Fantastic Four for the third or fourth time.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll see, because they're introducing the X-Men too. So who would a good X-Men? And then look, I'm a super fan of Galactus. You give me a good representation of Galactus, I'm there.
Yeah.
But we'll see. That was interesting.
You didn't
news.
like him as a
Headline
big cloud?
news. What's that, Bob?
You didn't like him as a big cloud?
No.
Cosmic fart.
There's only one cosmic fart in my heart, and that's V'ger.
Very good.
Yes.
Very good.
Anyways,
So, anything else you guys are reading or watching or? Bob talked about this before, and I got a copy of the Godzilla -1 soundtrack. Oh, so good.
See that? I need to see it.
Oh,
I may
it
sneak
has
out
been
and see it.
extended yet again. So if you haven't seen it in the theaters,
Hmm.
get out there and see it.
I
yeah.
may do that. Tomorrow's my last day of work, so I may sneak out this week and go see it.
You're retiring or you're on vacation?
If only that were true.
I heard last day of
I did
work,
too,
and I'm
right.
like, oh, wait, what?
My last day until January 2nd. And then back to the grindstone, God willing. I need the job, so don't jinx me.
No.
3 years, 4 months for me. Not that I'm counting.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, if only.
Yeah.
That does kind of bring up something, Bob, you being like the Godzilla guy in this group. Did you ever think you would see this much Godzilla content available?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah, isn't it wild?
Yeah, it's like we've got Godzilla X Kong coming up,
Right. Yeah.
and we've also got with Zuni, right? You've seen Zuni in that one?
Yeah. Monarch.
See, Larry and Karen didn't know who Zuni was. Zuni
Yeah.
was a little character from Fireball XL5. Welcome home.
Like a monkey.
Everybody's stumped. Anyway.
Everybody's like,
I'm just here nodding like an idiot, like,
Anyway, yeah, we got Godzilla X Kong coming up. We got Monarch on TV. We've got -1 in theaters, which just that alone and the critical acclaim it's getting.
Wild.
It's already nominated for an Oscar for Best Special Effects. And it's there's I think it's a Critics' Choice Awards nominated for Best Foreign Film. And yeah, it's like suddenly he's getting a bunch of respect. In fact, I didn't probably hang a Frankenstein mask on him. But, yeah, no, it's a very cool thing.
Yeah.
And hopefully it'll continue into next year.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful that there will be a sequel, which
I'm
people
sure
are saying. Yeah.
And if you like -1, you can go back and watch Space Battleship Yamato, the movie, or you could watch Lupin the First, both of which were directed by Yamazaki, who directed Godzilla -1.
Interesting. Yeah, it's one of my, if not my favorite film of the year. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're good. I think this is the end of this episode. Okay. That being said, happy holidays to all you
Merry
listeners.
Christmas. Happy New Year. Well, we'll be back before the new year, right? So
yeah, so
no, we won't.
I won't
no,
be.
we won't.
We'll be back in the new year.
We'll be
we'll
back,
be back in the new year. And at some
Merry
point, Lord
Christmas.
Blood-Rah.
Wait for your Happy New Year.
Well, we got to do Battle for the Planet of the Apes next
Yes.
year.
Oh,
I
I'm
was
in.
gonna
Please.
say we're gonna
gotta be
schedule
there.
that.
Let me know. I can't wait for Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes.
Oh, I know that looks
Well,
good.
yeah.
Well, we got to do Battle and the TV show and Turn.
I think we could stretch this out another 3, at least until your retirement, Bob. We could do Planet of the
No, I
Apes.
mean that we've got X-Files to do that with.
Okay. I'm in. Anytime you're going to talk apes, I'm in.
All right.
We'll
All
go
right.
ape.
And hey, you guys out there watching us on YouTube or listening to us on Spotify or Apple, or if you have some ideas for some shows you'd like us to tackle, let us know. Google, Facebook, Instagram, or X, whatever the hell they're calling it this week.
And please, nothing like Twilight.
Yeah,
And no Batman versus Superman.
Look at the faces on your screen right now. Appreciate our age when you make a suggestion.
Batman versus Superman. If you guys get like 1,000 votes for that,
We get 1,000, we'll have to do it.
We'll bring Lord Blood-Rah back for that one.
I'll talk about that movie.
I'll make sure I have a few beers before that one.
That might be one of the discussions we have offline with a couple of beers.
Well, that might have to be like the drinking episode.
There you go.
Stay here and drink and talk about the movie.
Take a shot every time you hear the word Martha.
Yeah.
Why did you say that?
Well, my friends, thank you again for being here for Christmas with Karloff. All you listeners out there, all of you watching, happy holidays. However you celebrate, happy Life Day. If you know that's what you celebrate. But you take care, stay safe. Planet 8 signing off. Peace out.
You know, I'm really not such a bad sort once you get to know me. I'm not so good in a crowd, but when I get you alone, you'd be surprised.
He isn't much at a dance, but then when he takes you home,
you'd be surprised.
he doesn't look like much of a lover.
But don't judge a book by its cover.
He has the face of an angel, but there's a devil in his eye. He's such a delicate thing.
But when I start in to squeeze, you'd be surprised.
He doesn't look very strong, but when you sit on his knees,
you'd be surprised. At a party or at a ball, I've got to admit I'm nothing at all.
But in a Morris chair, you'd be surprised. He's not so good in a house, but on a bench in the park, you'd be surprised.
I'm not so much in the light, but when I get in the dark, you'd be surprised.
On a streetcar or in a train,
you'd think I was born without any brain.
But in a taxi cab, you'd be surprised.
On that note, this will conclude this transmission from Planet 8. We would like to thank all of our intergalactic audience for listening. Be sure to head on over to our website at www.planet8podcast.com, where you can get more information on this episode's topic.
For more conversation, find us on Twitter at Planet8Cast.
Or on Facebook at facebook.com/Planet8Podcast.
We want to thank you guys for tuning in each and every episode. We look forward to your input and opinions. Until next time, this is Planet 8 signing off. End transmission.
By George, he's got it. It is the end.